Get that sound check done. Acoustics might be a little off here. You guys know I've been doing some traveling just to be able to upload videos right now. Yeah, Stardust. Houston's out of there. You can't tell me this wasn't by design or exacerbated in some way. Houston's come through far worse than this. I'm in Willis, so you guys know I'm far from Houston. I'm far north of Houston, and we got wiped out. There's like a little aegis of protection around my property, but it didn't extend to a lot of other people. So we had trees taking out RVs, whole houses. My neighborhood's different. It's a neighborhood with real houses, solid concrete foundations, but mixed in, there's properties. Because it's not a residential neighborhood, we don't have an HOA. We have a POA, Property Owners Association. It's very different because some people have these little temporary campers. Some people have nothing on their property, but 10 buildings. Other people have really nice RVs like I do. And, some people, they got real nice houses or mini houses or whatever. People just change it up. And some of these trees were taken completely out of the ground and just wiped out people's stuff. All right. So my audio's good. Excellent. We need to get into this because it is amazing. It is amazing that research that was conducted over 160 years ago by an academic, by an accredited scholar in Germany. A German put this material together 150 years ago. It was published 147 years ago in 1877. Publishers found it necessary to translate the German text into English and release it into the English-speaking world. That's what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you some pages. Many of my Archaix veterans, you already know the value of going into these old books, but over and over and over, I come across this wall of cognitive dissonance with people who just can't fathom. They're new to my channel, new to my research. They don't realize that I'm new to YouTube. I've only been doing this 4 years. Pretty impressive, 742 videos. But I've been in the publishing game for a long time. 2004, I broke out with my first article. 2006, my first published book. 17, 18, or 19 published books later, here I am. Still new to YouTube, but the research is old. So when we come across valuable text like this that just they reconfirm everything that we've been showing, it's amazing. So I'm sharing this book with you. The storm gave me a lot more reading time, a lot more downtime. And I knocked out a couple books because my next Book Monkey presentation is coming pretty fast. Got some gemstones in there as well. It's the Book of the Secrets of Enoch. We've already covered the first Enoch, the Book of Enoch, the Ethiopic text. Now we're going into the Slavonic Enoch. And it's very interesting too. Got some Phoenix material in there that you're going to want to see. So, all right, I need to remove these little videos from my studio and continue talking out loud like I do so I don't mess up. Phoenix Night checking in. Nelson Perez. You know what? I need to come out with some t-shirts. Phoenix Night. Been seeing a lot of big channels use thumbnails saying our world is not what you think. I seen another one. A lady was being interviewed on a channel that had like 700,000 views. I thought that was pretty. It's pretty cool when you see your own material out there. It doesn't matter if they don't cite me, but her thumbnail was you are more than you suppose yourself to be. There was no credit given to me anywhere in that presentation, but that's okay. That's okay. Archaix is making a stand, and there's a lot of people who are now understanding that there is a big deal about the SHAR. That's what we're going to talk about in this video as well. It changes everything. Yeah, Billy Carson's running for a reason. He's not a dumb man by any stretch of the imagination. He may not be a 140, but he's still not. He's not stupid. And once the SHAR is widely recognized for what it is, a turning of the stars, everything makes sense. You're going to see it here. You're going to see in this video that the Jews 2,400 years ago, when they were exiled to Babylon, and they got to go through the great Babylonian libraries when they put together their own cosmology, which was the book of Genesis. And then later, the Jewish priesthood added Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and 615 laws, and they codified it all. Every bit of this whole Shabbat system, the Sabbath, the lunar reckoning, and the SHAR system was all taken from Babylon, and the Jews knew all about it. So I find this so compelling. They even knew about the Phoenix phenomenon. The book of Genesis, the pre-flood world, Genesis chapters 1 through 5, is a Phoenix chronology. It is a Phoenix statement. It is 1,656 years. That is a Phoenix number divisible by 138. And the fact that they knew about Phoenix is even in the naming of the patriarchs. They said Adam's son was named Seth, and he was the patriarch of the Sethites. They stole that straight out of the Turin Papyrus. They stole that straight out of ancient Egyptian traditions about the children of Set, who possessed the knowledge of the Typhon, the Phoenix. Every bit of this. We've been putting all this together in Archaix, showing you an accurate unfolding of the history of the world. Been doing this in hundreds of presentations and in published books. And now in one book, you're going to see all this material. It's all synthetic. It ties in so well. Remember, the Jews invented the Jewish calendar, and it was only 450 years ago. No one before that period ever cited it or knew anything about it. It's 133 to 134 and a half years off for a reason. Yeah, everything that's been passed down to us from these people is a lie. And this is why there's great resistance against Archaix. I haven't told you guys everything, what I know about this great networking, this huge network of channels that are all working against me and who's funding them and why. I know a lot more than what I've been telling you. The time will come when I'll tell you everything. But yeah, guys, Archaix has been producing accurate data that cannot be refuted. I don't care who they are. And it upsets the establishment, basically hierarchy of information that they've revealed to the public. It exposes it as being wrong. These attacks against Archaix are mounting, they're growing, and they're becoming more and more sophisticated. These people are networking together. This is what they do. This is what they've done for a very long period of time. So let's get into this video, because this one's going to be a humdinger. And I'm going to show you that there's a tater in them onions, 100%. All right. Hello, Nanny Puffins. All right. Going down to the bottom of my chat. I slowed the chat down to 30 seconds from 60 seconds. That may not be a good idea. So it's hey, Funky Prepper. Man, I need to start watching your channel a little bit more often. Actually, I'm doing pretty good. They didn't catch me flat-footed. I was very prepared. I've been able to help quite a few people. All right. Hello, Jahar Lee. Didgeridoo. So I'm going to go ahead and I showed that chart to you guys in the Archaix community and on X. We're going to show that chart again later when it's relevant. It's not relevant at the beginning of this video, but that chart is amazing. The chart shows a visual representation of the 10 kings of Babylon, Berossus, the Chaldean kings before the flood, side by side with the 10 patriarchs of Genesis and how they sync And it's absolute proof. A comparative analysis is absolute proof that the Jews came into contact with information in Babylon when they wrote the book of Genesis. And that information concerned how to accurately compute the SHAR. And they did it. They did it. Shows absolutely that Zechariah Sitchin, Billy Carson, Matt LaCroix, all these people that are trying to tell you that all these huge numbers in the cuneiform text mean that an actual king sat on the throne of Shurappak for 64,800 years before the flood. Absolutely ridiculous. But the Jews knew you had to divide every one of these numbers by the Sumerian sexagesimal year. 360 degrees became 360 days. Every single SHAR is a turning of the stars. And when you do that, every bit of it fits. And the very fact that these kings that are mentioned on the Ashmolean king list, these dynasties like Kish and the Ison dynasty that were after the flood, it's amazing that archaeology, which does not use the chronological monographs that we find in the cuneiform text, archaeology uses the stelae, uses the monuments, the regnal list. It uses things that have actually been found, the cities that are mentioned in the text, artifacts that have been found. Archaeology absolutely dates these kings to the 24th, 23rd, and 22nd century BC. Archaeologists are not chronologists, and yet they still came up with the exact dates using a different method of analysis, proving that all these texts that talk about these kings and these huge numbers had to have been reduced by something, because there's no way that the first king and the last king can be the first king and the 10th king can be 432,000 years apart. It's impossible. But this is what Mr. Carson wants you to believe. Yeah, Mr. Carson thinks you're a dumbass. There's no other way to interpret that. There is no other way to get around the fact that this man is literally telling you something, wanting you to believe it, assuming that you're gullible, uneducated, and unable to think for yourself. It's ridiculous. Can't even believe people still buy into this shit. So let's see what this guy in Germany said 160 years ago. 160 years ago. Didn't have access to a lot of the archaeology, didn't have access to the internet, didn't have access to any of this material, didn't have access to Zechariah Sitchin's dumbass either. Let's see what he had to say 160 years ago. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, for those of you who don't know, yeah, due to all airport delays, due to the fact that infrastructure is still down, we're still without power almost everywhere. Internet's still down in most places in the greater Houston area and in north all the way into Willis. That's pretty bad, guys. It's pretty bad. So, I mean, people aren't dying. There's no rioting and all that because this isn't a systemic reset. This is not a systemic collapse. Systemic means across the board. This is very highly local, meaning a lot of help has been coming in from places that were unaffected. In a systemic collapse, that help doesn't exist. Communications are down. There's no gas, no food. You guys know the story. This was very temporary and local, and yet still, it's amazing that things aren't up and running yet. Texas was supposed to be one of the most prepared. We have our own infrastructure. We have our own electrical grid. How did it go down? It's crazy. Especially with so many states sending whole crews here to help out. There's another story to that. Yeah, people are already releasing video footage of whole fleets of these service vehicles just sitting in parking lots doing nothing. All right. So, without further ado, let's get into it. 16 minutes into this video, we need to get into it because this video has got some mind benders, amazing stuff that you've seen almost exclusively right here in Archaix. All right. I want to present, share my screen, share screen. All right, we're there. We are there. I got so many. Look at my lap. Look at my. I got so much stuff open. Got so many things I'm working on. These are all projects I'm working on. I'm working on all kinds of things. All right. So this is the book I showed you guys a while back. Here it is. History of Antiquity. It was donated to the Archaix Library. The German scholar Dunker. And like I said, it was 160 years ago, published in German 150 something years ago, and then translated into English and published in English in 1877, 147 years ago. The 6 volumes that I got were in mint condition. The person that donated them to me even told me to be careful because I would be cracking the spines. Somebody had bought all 6 volumes, put them on a shelf, and they have been on that shelf, and they were already old before I was born in 1973. It's amazing, guys. Whoever bought these books bought them for me, and by extension, for the Archaix community. And this is how we receive them in mint condition. The History of Antiquity from the German Professor Max Dunker. All right. Pretty interesting. And let's just dive in. Uh-oh, can't do that one. We've already done that. Oh, it's got my videos first. All right. So let me see if that's exactly how we're starting this. I'm going to need to remove these videos so they don't get in my way. I like you, Book Monkey, but you're in my way. All right. Cool. I'm good now. So, the Egyptians measured time by a solar year of 360 days, divided into 12 months of 30 days. That's very interesting. This man is saying the same thing that many other ancient scholars say. He talks about when they added 5 days as well. It wasn't just a simple adding of the 5 days. Something happened. The 360 days being divided by 12 months is also integral to the Archaix research because it's ancient authors like Diodorus that told us that the Egyptians counted a year as 30 days. He wrote that. He said that. So, concerning the goddess Hathor, represented as a cow in Egypt, said, to this cow, the king and queen offer flowers and fruits. In the temple of Edfu, a structure of the Ptolemies, 360 local forms of Hathor are said to have been enumerated, and among these, 7 were especially prominent. Again, this is the same thing in the ancient Near East. 360 degrees of the celestial sphere represented 360 days of the year. Of those 360 days of the year, 7 of them, representing the 7 kings and the 7 most prominent days, are identical. The system we find in ancient Egypt attached to the goddess is the same one we find in Sumer and Akkad. So let's move on. Concerning the goddess in ancient Egypt, to the feast of the goddess of Sais, whom the Greeks called Athene, the Egyptians came from the whole country, as Herodotus tells us, to Sais, and lighted lamps on the appointed night. And even those who did not come to Sais lit lamps, so that lamps were burning throughout all of Egypt. Iamblichus and Proclus tell us that the goddess of Sais, the Neith of the Egyptians, was the mother of the sun god. The inscriptions in Egypt call Neith the cow which bore the sun. So the link between Neith and Egypt, a goddess, the goddess of Sais, to Athene of the Greeks, shows us the calendrical references here are to a 360-day year. The ancient Attic Greek calendar was 360 days, as per the research of Robert Graves, undisputed authority on Greek antiquities. We have here a cross-cultural referencing of the goddess. Remember, Athene is nothing but the Indo-Iranian version of the reverse of Neith. The Egyptian epithets are exactly spelled opposite of the Indo-Iranian. And I've explained this many times. That's why we have Phen and Noth. It's the exact same thing. It's the phoenix. This is because one culture in ancient times wrote from left to right. Another culture wrote from right to left. And the epithets, the titles of themselves became reversed. We find this all throughout ancient records. A really good example is the founder of Egyptian civilization was Mena. But Mena in reverse is the Sumerian king Anum, who went to North Africa and established a nation. Most people don't know that. Sumer, the Sumerian king Anum, his son was Osiris. Yeah, this is in the book of Jasher. It's all there. Even dates it perfectly. Yeah, Sumer of Anum was none other than Mena, of the founder of, the Greeks called him Menes, the founder of ancient Egyptian civilization. So this Neith of the Egyptians was the mother of the sun god. This is exactly what we've shown you with the collapse of the vapor canopy. When the vapor canopy collapsed, the sun was visible for the first time. The vapor canopy world was the era of the goddess, spider grandmother, the great creatrix. Even the 7 kings of the Sumerian king list began with an 8th, and the 8th was actually the first. This is the riddle of the apocalyptic book of Revelation. And in that riddle, we find out that the 8th is the first returned. And in the Sumerian king list, the first ruler is the only one that has a female designator. It's because it was a relic of antiquity. It was an admission that the 7 kings had been granted their authority to rule over the kingdoms of men by the matriarchy, by the goddess during the vapor canopy period. When the vapor canopy collapsed and caused the great flood of Noah, the sun was visible for the first time in millennia, and it made it look like the collapse of the goddess. The goddess's water broke. When her water broke, it gave birth to a whole new world. That whole new world now had something in the sun. Here was the birth of the divine Horus. Here's Horus, the sun, just appeared. So it was basically the admission of a whole new epoch, a whole new era. But it was the cow goddess, which gives us even more context as to what the Israelites had brought the golden calf. When they brought the golden calf out of Egypt, it was because the Israelites were still a goddess venerating culture when they left Egypt. It was the Yahwists, the ones that worshiped the demon out of the burning bush, the ones that gave man 615 laws, and if you didn't obey them, you could be impaled. You could be burned at the stake. You could have your sons and daughters' skulls dashed upon the stones. Yeah, these are the rewards for those who disobeyed the dictates of Yahweh. These were not the laws of the goddess venerating Israelites who had come up out of Egypt at all. So let's move on. Let's see. With the cultus of the Bennu, you guys have heard me talk about the Bennu bird, representation of the phoenix. With the cultus of the Bennu at Heliopolis is connected the story of the phoenix. Herodotus tells us that he was informed by the inhabitants of Heliopolis that a bird, which, if it resembled the pictures, was gold-colored and red, and like an eagle in shape and size, came from Arabia to their city once every 500 years and buried the corpse of his father in Myrrh in the sanctuary of the sun god. So that's there's really not a lot to comment here. Heliopolis is the city of the sun. It's where the mansion of the phoenix was, an ancient city called Anu, back when it was a Sumerian outpost. Later, it had become under a nationalist population in Egypt. Its name was changed from Anu to Heliopolis, or On. The Greeks called it Heliopolis. Later became Memphis. Herodotus is basically identifying for us that the phoenix only appeared every 5 centuries. 500 is a round number. By the time of Herodotus in 450 BC, it was just unknown what the periodicity of the phoenix was. But that the phoenix identified the concept of burial, of death, and was connected to the sun god is very interesting here. Which leads us into this next passage. From later accounts, we learn that the phoenix, on reaching the age of 500 years, prepared a funeral pile of spices and burned himself upon it. Then he recreated himself and carried the remains of his old body to Heliopolis. Tacitus says, in the consulship of Paulus Fabius and Lucius Vitellius, for example, in the year 34 AD, after a lapse of centuries, the phoenix appeared in Egypt. Yeah, this is a problem for a lot of scholars. It shows that the text of Tacitus, which was in the possession of the church for centuries, and only the church possessed copies, had been tampered with. Because scholars have amassed a huge list of all the naturalists and all the writers who were alive at the time, of the 1st century AD. And there's no reference to a sun darkening. There's no reference to an eclipse, no reference to an earthquake. And for that matter, there's no reference to any miracle worker or any type of controversy going on anywhere in Jerusalem or the surrounding environs, except in texts that appeared 200 years later that were all texts of the apologists. And I've addressed that on my channel before, how early Christianity was unlike any other religion in the world. It started off with apologies. It started off with texts that were called apologies. And they were really just they were highly defensive, defending their positions. No other religion started that way. They were very assertive about, here's the facts, here's what happened, here's who did it, and all that. Not Christianity. Christianity started on the defensive from the very beginning. And all Christian texts are ex post facto compositions. None were written during the events they depict. So, the reference to 34 AD, the phoenix appearance of Tacitus, scholars have ruled that an interpolation. Let's see. Yeah, they say it was touched up by the church. And you guys know that the church is the one that introduced the whole phoenix phenomenon to the crucifixion story, the story of the Passion, because the earliest depicted story of Jesus was the Gospel of Marcion. No miracles, no virgin birth, no sun darkening, no earthquake, and none of that stuff happened during the crucifixion. All that stuff was added later to give it veracity, to borrow from the antiquity and prestige of a phenomenon that was very well known among cosmopolitan societies. And that was the return of the phoenix. That was well known. And they tried to tap into that faith by throwing these symbols into the gospel narrative. Let's go and move on to the next one before I check my chat. The first phoenix appeared in the reign of Sesostris, the second under the reign of Amasis. These were pharaohs. The third in the time of the third Ptolemy. This is a Macedonian Greek ruler over Egypt. And as there was only a lapse of 250 years between this Ptolemy and the reign of Tiberius in 34 AD, some regarded the last phoenix as a spurious one. So what is being said here is that we didn't need modern scholars to tell us that the reference to phoenix in 34 AD was an interpolation. It was a forgery that was introduced into the writings of the Roman Tacitus. We didn't need a modern scholar to tell us this, because this man 160 years ago found ancient authors who were already talking about that. Must not have been true, because only 250 years had passed since the last visitation of the phoenix. There is no way that the phoenix could have appeared, because to them, the phoenix appeared every 500 to 552 years, as I've documented in my published books and on my channel. 250 years is too abbreviated of time. So ancient authors didn't believe it, because it could have never happened according to the phoenix cycle. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Let's see. So Pliny informs us that the cycle of the great year was connected with the life of this bird. And with his return, the stars came again into their old position. Horopolo maintains that the phoenix was a symbol of the sun and signified one who returned from a long time from a far country. You're a real phoenix. You're a prodigal son. Some of you are baby phoenixes. There is no doubt, therefore, that the alleged appearance of the phoenix signified to the Egyptians the close of an astronomical period. On the monuments, the planet Venus is described as the star of Benu Osiris. As the morning star announced the day, the light returning out of darkness, it could easily be appropriated to Osiris, and that period might be connected with the cycles of the planet Venus. Just a second. So, association to the planet Venus. Where have we heard that before? It can't be ignored. I've uncovered evidence and exhibited it in Chronicon and my published books that Venus and Phoenix are phonetically similar, and that this link in phonetics is very ancient. It's not something that's modern. It's just like today we have Phoenix, and then we have a city in Europe called Venice. They're almost identical, but it starts with a V, Venice. So, Velikovsky's Worlds in Collision is a masterpiece of archaeological and historical and chronological material. Unfortunately, he makes the mistake of attributing these cataclysms in world history not to the phoenix, but to Venus. Emanuel Velikovsky, his research is genius, but he did us a disservice by not paying attention to the ancient chronographers, who also told us that many people make a mistake between Phoenix and Venus. And Venus, because Venus is in the sky all the time, and Phoenix only appears every 8 years, and sometimes 276 years, it was really easy to forget one and then basically uphold the other. This is what happened. I'm not the only person who has talked about how Phoenix and Venus have been interchanged unnecessarily. Frank Joseph mentions it, and so does somebody else who's translating a Hittite text, basically telling us that there was confusion with the planet Venus. So that's another data point. I can't remember that author's name. I can't remember. But it's interesting because Phoenix is the bringer of darkness. Venus is the light bringer. Isn't that weird? I don't know how they made that mistake, unless it was intentional. So I need to check my chat real quick because I'll be sharing my screen. All right, let's check this chat. Oh, there's Victoria. She's breaking it down for us. You talk about anything in the sky, Victoria's going to be on it. Glad you could join us. That's because this is pretty early. Awesome. 1242 people in the chat. That's a Phoenix number divisible by 138. Let's see. All right, so let's continue. This is going to get juicy, juicy. The oldest of these observations, that of a lunar eclipse of the year 721 BC. Archaix veterans, you know that year, 721 BC, which took place a good hour after midnight. The moon was eclipsed by something. The second took place in 720 BC, about midnight. The third in the same year after the rising of the moon. In these observations also, our astronomers have found but little to correct. So, 3 lunar eclipses back to back. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. 721 BC is probably very different than what happened in 720 and twice in 720 BC. In 721 BC, we know the sun darkened. We know from Marcus Varro's research. We know from all the traditions and texts that I have cited that during the reign of the 7 kings of Rome, during the Roman monarchy, something terrible happened. And the sun went dark and the moon turned red and rocks fell from the sky. And there was all kinds of fallout. 721 was truly an apocalyptic time for the 10 tribes of Israel as well, because the Assyrians, the warlike Assyrians, marched them into captivity. And they were taken away from Israel. In Judah, the Edomites were left behind. And they essentially became the people that we know them today, the Jews. So this 721 is a real interesting number. Let's see. Okay, before these kings and chief priests, the gods had ruled over Egypt. First, the 8 gods. These are called the Ogdoad. Then the 12 gods. Then Osiris, who is the Greek Dionysius, and after him, Typhon, the phoenix. And last of all, Horus, the sun. The sun came last. Here's a whole different way of looking at the same thing. I've already told you guys about in the Sumerian pantheon. How is it that the Sumerians have this long pantheon of well-established gods and goddesses, and yet the very last god is the sun, Utu Shamash? How's that possible? Egypt was the same way. They had the Ogdoad, the Ennead, they had the well-established pantheon of gods, starting with Ta, Num, Nut. It's just so many different gods. The pantheon was very ancient and well established. And at the very end, the sun is introduced into the family of the gods. Why? Because the goddess collapsed. The firmament fell down the day the sky fell. You know this is the flood of Noah. And when that happened, the sun, which had always been there, it was just obscured in the smoking mirror. The smoking mirror of the sky, the firmament. And when the sky fell, it exposed the sun and the blue sky, and now it made it look like the sun was born. And the collapse of the vapor canopy, all that water causing a flood, made it look like, because it was the age of the matriarchy, it was the age of the goddess. Spider grandmother's webs were across the sky, and they broke. And when they did, the water broke of the goddess, and it gave birth to a new world and a new sky. It's a new heavens and a new earth. So here it is told in a totally different way. And it even mentions Typhon. Typhon was before the sun, and that's true. So from the time of King Amasis to the time of Osiris, 15,000 years had passed. But from the time of the 12 gods to Amasis, 17,000 years. Now we have to address this. First, 24 centuries ago, Herodotus of Halicarnassus didn't believe this either. He knew there was something wrong with the numbers. This scholar even mentions that Herodotus does not conceal the doubts raised in his mind by the high antiquity claimed in these accounts. So, the Greek understanding of the Egyptian lunar reckoning is seen perfectly here. Here we see that Horus, the sun, appeared only after Typhon, the phoenix. The Egyptians would not have any records that covered 15,000 years. It's impossible. It's ridiculous. This 15,000 years is actually the same as the moons that were told by the Egyptian priests of Sais, who venerated the goddess, who used the lunar reckoning system in northern Egypt when they told Solon that Atlantis was destroyed 9,000 moons ago. He translated as years, and that's what Plato published. But Eudoxus of Cnidos and Diodorus corrected this and said, no, this was 9,000 moons. Changes everything. It changes everything to the point where 9,000 moons is 750 years. It completely takes Atlantis away from the Graham Hancock Fantasy Golden Dawn Society version, Helena Blavatsky Society version of 11,600 BC, and puts it in its historical place where it belongs. When the navies of the sea peoples federations that were coming from the Atlantic coast were attacking the Mediterranean world. It all fits perfectly. It fits so perfectly that all the people that I've called out for debate on this, like Graham Hancock and like Jimmy Corsetti and like Matthew LaCroix and like Billy Carson and a couple others, won't debate the issue because they've looked into it and they know they're wrong. They've doubled down. They have decided to continue with the lies because it makes them money. But it's not the truth. The truth is right here. 15,000 years is actually moons. And it reduces this to a 500-year period. Where do we just see 500 years? It's the ancient Egyptian belief of the return of the phoenix. 500 years. Typhon. So, on the 17th of Ether, the day on which Typhon slew Osiris, on this day the sun passes through Scorpion. The priest instituted rites of lamentation, and among other things, as a sign of the sorrow of Isis. Isis means she who weeps. They exhibited for 4 days a gilded cow covered with a black veil of byssus. For the cow was the Egyptian symbol of this goddess. Typhon killed Osiris in a period before Isis. The goddess gave birth to the sun. Osiris represents a prominent star, and his son appeared after Typhon destroyed the world and the stars. Remember, Typhon devoured the heavens. After this event, the Egyptians still venerated the goddess, but did so by covering objects with a black veil. Does this sound familiar? The goddess in ancient Egyptian text is a representation of the ancient vapor canopy sky that magnified the heavens. Spider grandmother and her webs that were woven across the sky. In Egyptian reliefs, Nut bends over, her hands touching the earth and her feet touching the earth, and she's perfectly arched. She is the vault of the sky. The goddess fell. When the goddess fell, the world was destroyed. The sun was born. Her water broke. And in reverence to the goddess after the cataclysm, while she was no longer in power, and now the sun had taken over the sky and was moving up, it's a whole different system. Those who still venerated the goddess did so by covering her artifacts, her reliquaries, her treasures, her idols, all her sigils. They did so by taking a black veil and covering it. Where have we seen the black veil covering a holy object before? Think about it, guys. One of the largest religions in the world has a holy object covered in a black tarp, a black veil, and their religious symbol is the moon and a star. Same old story, just a different mask. Plutarch observes that the Egyptians called Typhon Set. And this statement is confirmed in the inscriptions. The color of Set was burning red, like the glowing sun in the dust of the desert. That's Phoenix. Set, Typhon, and Phoenix are all the same thing. Now, the ass or the donkey was the sacred symbol of this god, and a peculiarly formed animal. His symbol is found on the monuments. Now, in poisonous serpents, also the Egyptians saw this destructive deity, and they brought the crocodile and the hippopotamus into association with him. The third of the 5 additional days added to the year belonged to Set. This was to the Egyptians an unlucky day. Remember, the Egyptians identified the 5 new days added to the year because of a cataclysm. One of those 5 new days was Typhon. Why would you take the bringer of darkness, a dragon, a red dragon from antiquity, something that embodies the concept of collapse, of evil, of destruction? Why would you name one of the additional 5 days of the year, from 360 days on the ancient calendar to the suddenly appearing extra 5 days a year? Why would you name one Phoenix, Typhon, Set, unless those 5 days had something to do with a cataclysm brought on by the sky dragon? It's the only explanation. And that's what we found in my book, Anunnaki Homeworld, and in Chronicon, and in my video presentations. I've showed you what happened in 713 BC when the Egyptians were forced to add 5 days, like every other culture in the world at the exact same time, added 5 days to their calendar. It wasn't something that people independently discovered. It was all done uniformly around the world at the same time. And it was done because of what appeared in the sky. So the Egyptians called those 5 days the unlucky days. On a papyrus, he is called the Almighty Destroyer and Blighter. This is Set, Typhon, Phoenix. So now the story of Exodus, Moses in Egypt during the 10 plagues, it takes on a whole new meaning when understanding the Egyptian beliefs. In the Colburn Bible, the plagues were caused by the appearance of the doom shape. This is the Phoenix all over again. As a bringer of dark. The doom shape was a bringer of darkness. Now, the Typhon Set Phoenix identity associated to the donkey links us to the prophet Balaam in the Old Testament, whose sons played a major role when they opposed Moses in the court of Pharaoh, for they threw down their staves, and which became serpents, poisonous serpents. And then Moses did the same thing according to the Jewish version. So now these are Phoenix symbols. In Egypt, Phoenix is represented as the red disc with the two serpents facing outward among phoenix wings. You've seen this over and over. The reason you didn't make the association before is because Zechariah Sitchin lied to you and told you that these are representations of Nibiru. And it's total crap. It's total crap. Over and over and over, we see representations of Ninurta, and we see representations of Assyrian gods who are in some type of little chariot with great eagles type wings flying across the sky, and sometimes it's a black sun that's in between those eagles' wings. And in every instance, you were told by Egyptologists that these are solar symbols, and by Zechariah Sitchin, you were told that these are representations of Nibiru, and all of them are wrong. These are representations of Phoenix. One way we can prove this is not just by how they look, but when they appear on date stelae and in monuments. That's right. In 859 BC, which was a Phoenix year, on the 138-year periodicity of the Phoenix timeline, in the year 859, we have an Assyrian pillar that is carved that shows the king of Assyria receiving obeisance from the king of Israel named Jehu, who brought him gifts and bowed down to him. The dating in the cuneiform is equal to our 859 BC. I have this published so everybody can see it in my book, When the Sun Darkens, about the Phoenix. Amazingly, at the top of that relief shows the winged black disc flying across the sky. The Assyrians were recognizing it for what it was. In the Phoenix year such and such, Jehu, king of Israel, came bearing gifts and swore allegiance to the throne of Assyria. That's a real artifact in the Near East. So, also of interest here, I found it very interesting that it mentioned the crocodile, that Typhon was associated to the crocodile. This is particularly interesting to me because in ancient Egypt, the crocodile, I do not know why, although I have a suspicion, the crocodile was associated in ancient Egypt to the counting of years. I don't know why. It's a calendar. It's a calendar. Now, it might have to do with some of the old sigils and reliefs and jewelry that has been found in tombs showing crocodiles being a representation of the world axis. And it shows the top of the crocodile pointing up, the tail pointing down. That's the axis of the world. And then it shows its arms and legs pointing out for northeast, south, and west. So I don't know. It was the crocodile is a symbol for calendars in ancient times, which it's not unheard of. I mean, in Mesoamerica, among the Toltecs, the Aztecs, the Quiche, the Zapotec, going back to the Olmeca and the Maya, we find the same symbol over and over that represents time, and that is the serpent or the dragon. Sometimes a lizard. It's always a reptile that represents. And I understand why, because in the vapor canopy world, it was widely known that the turning of the stars, SHAR, was in reference to the revolution of dragons, the turning of the dragons, Alpha Draconis. Thuban, the eye of the dragon, Alpha Draconis, was the pole star of the pre-flood world. It's a reptile. Let's see what this next one is before I check my chat again. Oh, here it is again. According to the belief of the Egyptians, Typhon escaped from Horus in the shape of a crocodile. The monuments represent Horus. Now, this is the sun on the sun boat in the act of stabbing a serpent. Typhon, here's now, strictly speaking, just from the perspective of ancient Egyptian beliefs attached to the individual ideas, we have the bringer of darkness, Typhon, which destroyed the goddess world of Nut, is himself vanquished by the sun, Horus. And the sun can't kill Typhon because Typhon now is somehow embedded in the calendar. This is what it says right here. Osiris, the father of Horus, represents the stellar system that existed during the pre-flood world. We'll get to that in a minute. I got another bomb to give y'all about this crocodile. So when Horus is invoked, he destroyed. Okay, all mankind rejoice when they see the sun. They praise the son of Osiris, the son of a star. And the serpent turns back. Hence, to the Egyptians, Horus was the triumphant god of light. So Osiris is the star Sirius, the dog star, which signals the annual flooding of the Nile after the cataclysm. Before the cataclysm, the star Sirius was something else indeed, as we'll see. Remember, before the cataclysm, most of these things that were venerated were matriarchal, connected to the goddess. After the cataclysm, when Egypt was being established 300 years after the Great Flood, a lot of the older goddess associations were removed and replaced with patriarchal, with male attributes. Sirius, the dog star, is one of them. Don't take my word for it. We'll get to it right here. The dog star only became male after the cataclysm. Let me check my chat before we go on. We still got some awesome ground to cover. All right. A crocodile swallows a clock in Peter Pan. Oh, yeah, you already know Disney's full of all these associations. All right. Chat's going good. We're getting closer and closer to this awesome Berossus 10 Kings chronology, which is the highlight of this video. Yeah, this video is going to go down. This video, people are going to be taking pieces out of this video and sharing it. This is amazing. This is amazing to find what the people who wrote the Bible, they knew the truth and they hid it anyway. It's all right here in this video. So Plutarch tells us that Isis, in the minds of the Egyptians, was the female receptive part of nature. Osiris was the light. Typhon, the darkness, the obscuration of the sun and the moon. You see that right there? Remember, 721 BC, something darkened the moon. Here it is right here. Typhon darkens both the sun and the moon. Osiris was the fruit-giving Nile water. Typhon was the salt and barren sea. Osiris was moisture. Typhon was drought, the parching wind, which overcomes and consumes moisture. Osiris was health. Typhon was disease. Typhus, anyone? It's very interesting. So here we're going to get into the king list of Egypt. This researcher impressed me because he's telling you the truth. There has never, ever in the history of Egypt ever been a time when Egyptians themselves had ever known or published a chronological record of their achievements, of their dynasties, kingdoms, wars, none of that. The Egyptians were not that type of culture. They did not record anything in linear fashion from one generation to another. Every historical piece of information we get from Egypt is highly compartmentalized into the dynasty or the regnal list of the ruler at the time. And many times, a new ruler who is offended by somebody, one of his predecessors, would literally erase his records, hoping and trying to find, sometimes even sending crews out to find their hidden sepulchres so they could go ahead and erase them from existence as well. That was the whole mummification, purification ritual. It was to preserve their mummy forever. So in the afterlife, they will always have a corresponding astral body that they could travel in. This was the belief of the Egyptians. They needed that mummy to survive. To destroy a mummy was to tear the very fabric of that soul apart forever. So this was their belief. So what amount of authority should be ascribed to the lists of Manetho? This is a very good question, because Egyptian dynastic civilization collapsed 500 years before Manetho was even born. And yet Manetho is where we get our official Egyptological records today. Do you need me to repeat that? In the encyclopedias, in the books by Egyptologists, it is the dynastic lists of Manetho, which are highly contrived. This is the official version of the history of Egypt that we have today, and it's almost total crap. The man, Manetho, lived 500 years after Egypt collapsed. He is not an authority on Egyptian antiquities. But this is what we use. So did the priests really possess sketches of kings and accounts of their reigns reaching back more than 5,000 years? In order to believe this, we must not allow that at such a remote time as the reign of Menes, this is Annam of Sumer, or soon after it, writing was known and in use in Egypt, meaning 5,000 years ago, they were already writing in Egypt. And granting this, must not the first beginning of culture in Egypt be carried back at least another 500 years before Menes? This is a uniformitarian perspective. I kind of agree with him in this respect, meaning that if Egyptian civilization was already advanced 5,000 years ago, wouldn't it mean that it goes back 500 more years to get to that level of advancement? Moreover, the lists do not correspond with the number of the kings given by Herodotus of Halicarnassus in 450 BC. Nor do the dynastic lists of Manetho even match anything published in the Egyptian histories of Diodorus Siculus. This is a problem. This is a huge problem. Herodotus, as we have said, put 346 generations before the time of Cambyses. But Diodorus Siculus gave us 479 kings before the exact same date. Manetho's king list of Egypt is different than Herodotus and Diodorus' own records. In fact, there is no way to reconcile Herodotus' 346 generations with Diodorus' 479 kings. There's no way to reconcile. They don't even have the same names. So, the excerpt of Africanus from Manetho, even if we substitute the smaller numbers given in the excerpt of Eusebius in all the dynasties, of which only the total sum of the rulers is stated, still gives us 388 kings from Menes to Cambyses. If these discrepancies awaken the suspicion that the number and the succession of the kings was not agreed upon, even by the priests themselves, then the suspicion is increased. Yeah. Now we have Africanus and Eusebius. Their king lists don't correspond to anybody's. Egyptologists today and researchers who rely heavily on the dynastic regnal lists of Manetho, they do so in faith. There is no way to put these together. Men were trying to do this way back then, and they just never did it. It's never been done. So it's crazy. Whole thing's just crazy. Concerning the Turin Papyrus, the list of kings on the Turin Papyrus, it has been much damaged, and therefore we can only discover that about 240 names were given, of which, however, about 100 names are entirely gone. And of the others, the lesser half at least is hardly legible. As has been remarked, Manetho numbers at least 284 kings to the 18th dynasty. Moreover, the papyrus does not agree with Manetho in the division of the dynasties. In certain places, which do not coincide with the sections of Manetho, totals are given of the preceding reigns. This is a problem. The Egyptian Turin Papyrus is ancient. The writings of Manetho are 500 years after Egypt was taken over by the Persians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Macedonians, the Ptolemies, the Romans. This is the world of Manetho. After all these takeovers, after all these revisionist histories were published in the libraries of Alexandria, after all the redactions, after Jewish scribes got a hold of all these and rewrote them to put themselves at the center of attention of all these world events for which they never belonged. After all this, after the Old Testament was basically taken and stolen from Israelite, Phoenician, Aramean, Ugaritic, Rashameric, and Babylonian, and Assyrian, and Amorite texts, after the Jews had taken and borrowed from everybody and put together this Old Testament history for which did not happen, which has the Jews as main characters where they were never even participants in the past. Never. After all that, we have Manetho telling us what Egyptian history was. You can't accept Manetho as an authority 5 centuries after the final collapse of the dynasties of an empire and a kingdom, of a culture that had lasted for over 18 centuries, 2,000 years, but had ended 500 years before you were born. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. So let's move on. All right. I got to run in my mouth, and sometimes I want to check my chat. Make sure there's no interruption. Yeah, if people would just look at things chronologically, you will see how so many arguments absolutely collapse. They just dissipate. And that the truth just stares you in the face once you have all the data and you just lay it out. You ain't got to put it together yourself. It puts itself together by removing everything that cannot be possible. That's what Chronicle is about. We started with 100,000 different scenarios and variables. And then we look at the material and we start removing everything that doesn't fit. What's left is the truth. There it is. Let's see. All right. All looks good. All looks good. Let's get back to this. We are moving. Thus, from the dynasties expressly marked as Memphitic or Theban, Memphites the north, Thebes is the south, a series may be formed which shortens the calculation of Manetho by at least 1,000 years. We might proceed further in this direction and reduce Manetho's list by 2,000 or even 3,000 years. According to the separate items of the excerpts preserved, Manetho's 30 dynasties include a series of 5,366 Egyptian years from the year 5702 to the year 340 BC. Nevertheless, Syncellus, in a passage of his own chronology, has observed that the whole period of history treated by Manetho in his own 3 books covers only 3,555 years. That's interesting. That means that Syncellus, 17 centuries ago, had access to information that allowed him to correct some of the mistakes of Manetho. That's pretty interesting. The picture of the sky goddess served as a symbol for the sky. This is Egyptian hieroglyphics. The Egyptians regarded the sky as arched over the earth. The feet of the goddess rested at one extremity and her hands on the other. That's why the flood is regarded as the water breaking of the goddess. And when the water broke, the goddess gave birth to the sun. Sothis is the star Sirius. For those of you who don't know. After the cataclysm, it was made into a male. So Manetho put Ptah at the head of the dynasties of the gods. He ruled for, where you've seen this number before, he ruled for 9,000 years before the other gods. Inscriptions named Ptah the Lord of Truth, the Father of Truth, the ruler of the sky, the king of both worlds. As the God of the light, which shows everything in its true form, he is the Spirit of truth. As the Spirit of the light in the sky, he is the Lord of heaven. The inscriptions also say that Ptah moves the egg of the sun and the moon. He is called the weaver of the beginnings, the God who rolls his egg in the sky. Consequently, to the Egyptians, Ptah was the mover of the luminaries. I'm going to tell you guys right now that the early Egyptians, after the cataclysm, there was a patriarchal takeover, and they took the official titles of the goddess and they made them male, and they attributed them to a male deity. But these are all associations not of a man, but of the goddess right here. The weaver of the beginnings, old woman weaver, spider grandmother. That's all goddess vernacular. Also, rolling the egg of the sun and the moon across the sky. Nope, that's all goddess vernacular. Does not belong to a male god. This is the result of patriarchal takeover. Let's see here. See where I'm at. Where am I going with this? All right. According to Plutarch, the Egyptians believed that the sun arose out of moisture, that it sprang up out of water and was nourished by it, and therefore water was the beginning and origin of things. This account is confirmed by the monuments. There it is again. The sun was born out of water. What the ancient Egyptians believed is exactly what the Toltecs taught centuries ago. That after the cataclysm, the first cataclysm was called the Water Sun Age. The Water Sun Age collapsed. Yeah, it was an age of giants. That's what the Toltecs teach. It's called the Water Sun. How does water and sunlight go together? The sun is a burning disk, right? And water is wet. How do they go together? Unless you come to the conclusion that the sun was born out of water, because water fell from the sky. The vapor canopy collapsed, and that's what made the sun visible. It's that clear. So, all right. When Horus is invoked, he destroys them. All mankind rejoice when they see the sun. They praise the son of Osiris, and the serpent turns back. Okay, I've already done that one. Let's see here. I need to see something. Did I skip the reference to Ptah? 9,000 years? Maybe I didn't. I don't remember seeing the 18,000. I saw a reference to 18,000. I never discussed it, did I? Just don't remember. There's 15,000. No, I guess I didn't. Guess I didn't. Oh, we're going a little too far now. Let's see here. All right. So Manathos, where was the I want to go back to that for a second about Ptah. The 9,000 years, Manathos references to Ptah, they're very close to the description of Surid and of Enoch. Also the Sumerian Etana. All three of them were attributed, all three of them were consolidators of kingdoms into empires. Etana and Enoch disappeared into the sky. They were both known as master builders. But what's really interesting is Surid and Enoch, they were both builders of the Great Pyramid complex. So we have Surid and Enoch ruled for 300 years. This is the book of Jasher and the ancient Egyptian Coptic records. I've shown these in my books frequently. So this 300-year period belonged to the rulership of Enoch and when Surid ruled. And during this time, Surid of ancient Egypt ruled over 130 of the nomes of Egypt, whereas in the book of Jasher, we find that Enoch ruled 130 kings and princes for 300 years, was the length of his empire. This is interesting because these traditions hold that Surid is the builder of the Great Pyramid before the flood, and it was called Harkuti, or Lord of the Lights. This 9,000 as an Egyptian lunar reckoning is divided by 30 days, and it becomes 300 years exactly. This may be exactly where Manetho got it, because by the time of Manetho, he would have made the same mistakes Solon and Plato had made. They knew that it was the number 9,000, but they didn't know how to factor it. They didn't know if it was the lunar reckoning, if it was going to be a lunar year of 354 days, if it was going to be the lunar reckoning of the lunisolar, if it was going to be divided by a 360 day. They didn't know if it was going to be divided by the 12 months, if it was going to, or if it was going to be divided by the way Diodorus did it. Every 30 days was an Egyptian year. They didn't know. So Manetho wouldn't have known either, because he was much later than Plato. He was over a century and a half, 2 centuries after Plato. So he would have definitely not known how to do that. There was nobody in Egypt that could even tell them how to do that by that time. So the references to Ptah are after the cataclysm, Aryan descriptions of the beginning, but with a removal of the goddess. The divine weaver was the goddess, but this patriarchal Egyptian takeover removed this connection. And the most revealing idea here is that the sun and the moon are eggs that move across the sky. Eggs represent the beginning, and they reveal that the sun and moon give birth to things on earth. Think about that for a minute. How many times in Archaix presentations have I shown you guys very unusual things that just suddenly appeared in the sky and fell to the earth? It's very interesting. All right. So we have a reference in this book. This research is 160 years old. I found something awesome that Isis does. This is after Typhon kills Osiris. Isis discovers the body of her husband at Byblus on the Phoenician coast. Now, he's saying that this is probably an invention of the Greeks, who confounded the Phoenician horned goddess Astarte, Ashtaroth Carneum of the Old Testament, with Isis. I'm going to tell you that he's wrong. He's wrong. two different stories got mixed up here from the ancient world. Those of you who have read my Mighty Hunter of World Mythology, King of the Giants book, it's never been published, but I have a PDF download of it on Podia or Gumroad. Those of you who have read my unpublished book on the life of Amar-Udaak, better known as Nimrod, you will know that this king, Gilgamesh, was another one of his names. Ur-Nammu was another one of his names. When the Amorites of Mari and Mitanni invaded in the 5th dynasty of Babylon, they empowered him after he had just lost his army fighting against Chedorlaomer. He also fought on the battlefields against Sodom and Gomorrah before Sodom and Gomorrah were wiped out in a cataclysm with the Mohenjo-Daro in Larak, the Harappan Indus Valley civilization, and all of the Sumerian cities. They all got wiped out together in 1849 BC. This man saw all that. This man is famous. I wrote a book about him because he's very famous. In fact, his death was infamous throughout the ancient world. It is the origin of the king dying, being killed by a boar, the king being killed in the hunt. Nimrod went to the Hule Marsh in Canaan, Phoenicia, and was killed there. No one knows if it was an actual boar or if he was murdered by his own people or an enemy, but he was killed there. And Queen Semiramis, his mother and his wife, dispatched the military to go out there and bring his body back. And this is a famous story. I show all the different cultures around the world who remember. Another name was Amazaduga. Another name was Tammuz. He had many titles around the world. It's the same figure. He was believed to be of both giant and titan blood, but he was a human king. And the Jews called him Nimrod from the same root from the Babylonian Marduk, Amar-Udaak, Merodach, and Mardon. These are all the same figure. It's different cultures at different time periods called him by different names. But his death was famous, and that's what this is talking about here, about Isis discovers the body at Byblos on the Phoenician coast, and he says it's probably an invention of the Greeks who confounded the Phoenician horned goddess Ashtaroth with Ashtaroth Karnaim and with Isis. But it's not a mistake. It's just a merging of two different ancient stories that were equally popular in the ancient world. This is what happens when people record things centuries and sometimes millennia after they happen. You're going to make these mistakes. So Herodotus, 450 BC, in his book, The Histories of the, Herodotus was a historian of Turkey, ancient Turkey. The city was called Halicarnassus. His book is famous. It's still published today. I have a copy of it in my library. In the Histories, which is huge, it says, but as to the building of the pyramids, there is no agreement either among the Egyptians or their historians. And that's very true. That's very true. Even 1,000 years ago, Al-Masaudi, Al-Makrizi, Biruni, the great Arab travelers and scholars, they all wrote about Giza and the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx and its mysteries, and they all were in agreement that had the Great Pyramid complexes been built after the flood, then there would have been a written record as to the builders. There would have been a civilization able to lay claim to their construction. The Arab scholars are not wrong. The Great Pyramids are pre-cataclysm, and this is why there's no historical references to the building of these structures. In Herodotus, 450 BC, we're talking about almost 25 centuries ago. This great historian, Herodotus, even agrees nothing is known about the Great Pyramids. He's not even willing to call them Egyptian. Remember, I showed you guys charts. My Archaix veterans, you've seen the charts. There's 450 miles between the Great Pyramids and the oldest Egyptian cities. Yeah, there's nothing but desert in between them. That's why it was always called the two Egypts. 450 miles in the ancient world was the distance between empires. But all of a sudden, Egyptologists want to tell you that the southern Egypt that called Waset and Kemet, that buried their rulers in the Valley of the Kings, somehow also came all the way north and built all these pyramids to put pharaohs in them, for which not one mummy has ever been found. It's just ridiculous. It's a dumb theory. All right, let's move on. All right. Check my chat again. Moving right along. All right. 500 miles is a very long distance. Hell yeah, it is. All right, let's keep going so we can get to this gold mine. Somebody said, are there any PDFs that anyone can suggest to me surrounding the ancient SHAR system? I provide free PDFs on Podia, breakdowns of the SHAR system, showing how it corrects all the calendars in the ancient world. All right, back to it. So Herodotus goes on and says the 100,000 workmen of Herodotus changed every 3 months, and the 360,000 of Diodorus. Here's two different versions of how the Great Pyramid was built. A number formed from the days in the old Egyptian year, 360, have arisen out of the free invention of later times, although the building must certainly have occupied more than a decade of years. Inscriptions are not found now on the external side of the pyramid. If such were in existence at the time of Herodotus, they certainly contained other things than those which the interpreter pretended to read there. The interpreters who served as guides to the travelers of that day in Egypt, as the dragoman does now, could hardly have read the hieroglyphics. They contented themselves with narrating the traditions and stories popularly connected with the great monuments. This man, 160 years ago, has correctly ascertained that Herodotus was lied to by the Egyptians in 450 BC when he traveled and asked them about Egyptian hieroglyphics, because in 450 BC, they would not have been able to read them in Egypt. Hieroglyphics were in disuse. After that came the Egyptian hieratic, the Demotic, other scripts developed. Hieroglyphics were ancient, and they would have not been understood in the days of Herodotus. This man nailed it. There's no way that the Egyptians told the truth that Cheops, Khufu, built the Great Pyramid Complex. If it was true, then Colonel Howard Weiss in 1837 would not have had to go in there and forge Khufu's cartouche in the relieving chambers of Davidson, to his discredit. Yeah, he was snitched on by Humphreys Brewer. So it's yeah, man. I like her. I like this guy. This guy nails it. He nails it. All right, so here's something I found really interesting concerning the Great Pyramid. The chronologist Lepsius, he went through Manetho's material and his own chronological records, put everything together, and by correcting Manetho, the chronologist Lepsius dates the building of the Great Pyramid between 3095 BC and 2903 BC. My Archaix veterans, do you see how close that date is? If you look in Chronicon, you will see that construction on the Great Pyramid began in 2905 BC. And I provide the sources and reasons why that's in Chronicon. This man, Lepsius, centuries ago, published that 2903 as the building. That's all. It's a scientific bullseye. In chronology, it's 2 years off, but you can't. You know what? It's amazing. I have no idea what data he was operating off of because my own data comes from totally different sources. All right, okay, so Aristotle, the student of Plato. Aristotle remarks that in Babylon, astronomical observations were said to exist extending back 31,000 years from the time of Alexander the Great. That's what Aristotle said. Aristotle remarks that in Babylon, astronomical observations were said to exist extending back 31,000 years from the time of Alexander the Great. That's amazing. So Diodorus tells us that the priests of Babylon declared that they had observed the heavens for 473,000 years. That's a pretty big number. Cicero speaks of the shamelessness of the Chaldeans in boasting that they possessed records for more than 470,000 years. So Cicero of Rome wasn't trying to hear it. He said, you guys are lying. You don't have anything going back near that far. Julius Africanus gives 480,000. He just rounded it up years. And Pliny the Elder gives us 720,000 years as to the period for which observations of the heavens were burnt upon tiles in cuneiform tablets in existence. So let's break that down. Aristotle's 31,000 years is intriguing because Aristotle did not buy the Atlantis story of his teacher Plato. Using the Egyptian lunar reckoning, this 31,000 becomes a simple 1,033 years. And 1,033 years before Alexander becoming Alexander the Great in 331 BC when he sat on the throne of Babylon, that gives us the year 1364 BC exactly. That's very important because that's the beginning of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, meaning that it's correct. The beginning of the Neo-Babylonian records began 31,000 SHARs into the past. Aristotle is correct. It's 31,000. 31,000 is not years. How do we know? Because it's 1364 BC. And that's not an arbitrary date, as you're going to hear right now from an entirely different method of calculation involving SHARs. It says right here, Diodorus' statement that the Babylonian priests counted 473,000 years of history, which is a huge number being SHARs, is reduced easily to 1,313 years. If this 1,313 years is calculated back to the year Diodorus himself turned 40 years old in the 1st century BC, then 473,000 SHARs that he wrote about began in 1364 BC. The 31,000 SHARs of Aristotle matches perfectly the 473,000 SHARs of Diodorus Siculus. Started at different times in history. They they ended and were calculated and factored back at different times in history by different researchers, and yet the begin date is still the same. And it's only possible when you divide these massive numbers by turnings of the stars, 360. It's crazy. This, my friends, is epic proof that the SHAR is a day. So Pliny the Elder, who wrote natural history, Pliny the Elder, the same guy that died when Vesuvius erupted, not because he was in the vicinity, but because he got a message from a wealthy female who was a friend of his, and he got a ship, he commissioned a ship, and they went back, and he got buried in Pumice, and he's never been seen again. Pliny died trying to rescue a friend. 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius blew up. Pliny the Elder wrote the 720,000 years. But when reduced to SHARs, just turning of the stars, 720,000 SHARs is precisely 2,000 years. And 2,000 years before Pliny is 1950 BC. This is the start of the awakening of civilization in the Near East after the cataclysmic day the sky fell, after the flood of Noah in 2239 BC. Pliny the Elder is absolutely correct. 720,000 SHARs before his time is when civilization began waking up and counting and then factoring the knowledge of the stars. Absolutely correct. And only by factoring these massive numbers by 360 days are these calculations made correct. They prove that a SHAR is a day. All right, check my chat again before we continue on to the next part. A lot of SHAR material in here I showed you guys, but we're not done. We're not done. All right. All right, let's see. All right. Yeah, Pliny was a real friend. Cost him his life. Cost him his life. All right. Let's see. All right. Here's something interesting. Talking about ancient Sumer and Akkad. Of these 24 stars, those which were visible decided on the fortunes of the living, and those that were invisible on the fortunes of the dead. The inscriptions in the Near East also distinguish two classes of 12 stars each, one of which is named the Stars of Akkad, the other the Stars of the West. What is being conveyed here are two different astronomies. As I've shown in my presentations multiple times, the Near East was interrupted by an invasion of a Caucasian people that came from the West. These people were believed to be the descendants of an ancient race of Titans that had been formerly banished. When they came back extremely powerful. They overran Egypt, becoming the Hyksos. They were called the Tamahu. But all throughout the Near East, they were regarded and feared and respected for their power. They were called the Amuru, and the Israelites were a branch of these people. So these were the Amuru. Amuru means the Westerners. What is being described here in this 160-year-old research is that in the ancient Near East, there was an astronomy that had 12 prominent stars, and it was regarded in Akkad, which was the center at that time for the Near East, for Babylonia, the fallen Sumer, Hittite Anatolia, Syria, Aram, Mitanni, all this area, all that region, Babylonia. But It was early on after the flood when the Amuru invaded. They came and took over everybody, and they became the ruling class. And their center of operations was the city of Mari and Mitanni. These are also the ancestors of the Syrian people, the people of Aram. But I just thought that was really interesting to see that these people must have been so prominent that they brought their own astronomy, science of astronomy, and it had to be recognized in the areas of occupation. Here's another interesting little tidbit. Thus, to the Egyptians, this star, Sothis, this is Sirius, was the lady of the beginning. How come we don't hear about that? How come the references today of the dog star Sirius it's presented as a male, but the ancient Egyptians regarded the dog star as female. Lady of the beginning. This is another title for the goddess. Oh, now we get to the juicy. We're going to get to the Babylonian king list of the Chaldeans, preserved by the Greek Babylonian historian Berossus. Berossus is a problem because we have in Berossus someone that Zechariah Sitchin and Billy Carson quotes as an authority. Berossus made many mistakes, but Berossus is no different than Manetho. Berossus is preserving histories that were already 1,000 years old before Berossus was born. Berossus is preserving whatever he found in the Alexandrian library, and he wrote a history of the Chaldean kings. But you can't really rely on Berossus as an authority. He's the reason these guys all think a SHAR is 3,600 years. They just don't understand. They don't understand Berossus made many critical mistakes that have been corrected by other scholars, even in the days of Berossus. So we're going to get to that right now. The king list is fantastic. Let's see. All right. Now we're getting to Berossus, the juicy. So Berossus gives us a breakdown of the 10 kings of Chaldea before the flood. Let's look at this. The first sovereign of Babylon was Aloris, a Chaldean of the city of Babylon, whom the god had appointed himself out to the nation as a shepherd. His reign continued for 36,000 years. Do you believe that a single king could live for 36,000 years? Do you believe that? Billy Carson believes it because that's what he's teaching everybody. And it just blows my mind that some of these podcast personalities keep a straight face when they sit here and listen to him talk about this stuff. Blows my mind. How do you keep a straight face? How do you not stop you and say, whoa, what are you talking about? The Anunnaki lived for tens of thousands of years. Yeah. After the death of Aloris, his son, Alaparis, ruled for 10,080 years, 10,800 years. Where have you seen that number before, Archaix veterans? He was succeeded by Almalon from the Chaldeans of the city of Sippara. That's the city of books. That's the ancient Alexandrian library of the pre-flood world. For 46,800 years, man, this king ruled for 46,800 years. Do you have any idea how long a span of time that is for you not to have an accident, for you not to say something dumb and somebody just kill you for it? a whole 46,800 years for you not to get sick and get a disease, get bit by something that becomes infected and you die. The laws of probability mandate that you would have died many, many hundreds of times in 46,800 years by simple accidents of nature alone. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And Alamelon by Amnemnon, a Chaldean of the same city, for 43,200 years. Under his rule, there came out of the sea an animal combining like Oan, which is Oannes, the shape of a fish and a man, and called Idotion. After Amnemnon came a Megaloris of the city of Sippara for 64,800 years, and after him Danos, also from Sippara, for 36,000 years. In his reign, there again appeared from the Red Sea 4 animals in the shape of men and fish. These were Eudokus, Enagamus, Enobulus, and Anamentus. Danous was followed by I can't even pronounce it, Edoranicus from Sippara, that's the city of books, who ruled for 64,800 years. Here's another one. That's a lot of years. And in his time appeared another monster of the same kind, named Oticon. This is the ancient Dagon of the Philistines, Oticon. These explained in detail what Oannes had given in the Psalm. After Endorachus came, I can't even pronounce these guys, a Memsinus, a Chaldean, that's supposed to be, it says Larantia here, but it's supposed to be a Chaldean of Larak, for 36,000 years. That's an awfully convenient number, 360 times 10,000, or times 1,000. And after him, Ubar Tutu. Here it says Ubar Tulu, it's the same person. A Chaldean of the same city for 28,000 years. Okay, Ubar Tutu's son was the flood hero, Exuthros, who reigned 64,800 years. So from the first year of Aloris to the last year of the flood hero, Xisuthros, was 432,000 years had elapsed. This is the mistake of Berossus right here. And this is the flood story now. In this year, the god Bel revealed to Xisuthros in a dream that in the 15th year of the month of Decius, there would be a great storm of rain, and men would be destroyed by the flood of waters. He bade him to bury all written records, the ancient, medieval, and modern, in Sippara, the city of the sun. This is in Egypt. It is called Saqqara. And build a ship and embark in it with his kindred and nearest friends. Remember, guys, most people don't know this, but a very ancient ship was found in a special sepulcher right outside the Great Pyramid. At the very base of the Great Pyramid itself, a sepulcher of unusual, gigantic size was found. And archaeologists, just within the last 50 years, excavated a wooden ship out of that giant sarcophagus. I'm really surprised that more people haven't done videos or written books about this. This was an amazing ship. The ship was made and it was taken apart and it was all laid out. It was 144 pieces. But this ship that's called the Ship of Pharaoh, some call it the Ship of the Sun. But it was at the base of the Great Pyramid. And it's a symbolic ship, even though it was actual navigational size. Archaeologists said that if you put this ship back together, it's ocean. It's able to navigate the oceans. So I'm not saying it's the Ark. I'm saying that a navigator symbol was put at the base of the Great Pyramid in a giant sepulcher. So this is the story from which the Jews got the story of Noah, the flood survivor. It's right here in Berossus. Here it is, all right here. All about, he released, after the rains stopped and he and his family are in the ark, he released a bird and the bird came back. Then he released two birds and the birds came back. Then he released birds again. They didn't come back and he knew dry land was available. This is the story of Noah. It's all right here. We don't have to go through this whole thing. But what we do need to do is look at something amazing, which we're going to do right now. Let me go back, check my chat. All right. So, yeah, this gets more intriguing, guys, because when we break this down to its lowest common denominators, the 10 kings, I just read you the king list of Berossus, the 10 kings before the flood, the Chaldean kings. The first was Alorus. Alorus ruled for 36,000 shars. Alparis ruled for 10,800 shars. Al-Milan of Sippar, this is Saqqara in Egypt, ruled for 46,800 shars. And Memnon ruled for 43,200 shars, another number divisible by 144. And during his reign, a navigator arrived named Dotion. Amegalaris of Sippar, 64,800 shars. Danos of Sippar, 36,000 shars. And in the reign of Danos of Sippar, Saqqara, again, more ships appeared from the sea of a strange people during his reign. Indorachus of Sippar, 64,800 shars. We have Amencenis of Lamech, 36,000 shars. Ubar Tutu of Lamech, 28,000 shars. That's the only one divisible by 7. Very unusual. He's the father of the flood hero Xisuthros, 64,800 shars. So this is the origin of the 432,000 shars, years before the flood. From the appearance of the Anunnaki to the Great Flood. These numbers of reigns of 64,800 as years is preposterous. It is fantasy. It's fantasy. And Billy Carson and all of these Anunnaki weirdos out there, they should be embarrassed. This is adult fantasy. When you translate these numbers by how a SHAR is supposed to be translated as days, you find out that the first king Alorus sat on the throne for 100 years. The second king, Alaparis, sat on the throne for 30 years. The third king, Al-Milan of Sippar, sat on the throne for 130 years. Ammenimnon for 120 years. During his 120-year reign was when the navigator Dotion appeared on the shores of Egypt from another civilization. Amegalaris of Sippar ruled 180 years. Danois of Sippar only ruled 100 years. During his 100 years, more ships appeared from another strange race. Indorachus of Sippar ruled 180 years. Amencenis of Lamech ruled 180 years. And then Ubar Tutu of Lamech, the father of the flood hero, ruled for 77.7 years. This is the only decimal provided in the king list, and it's very revealing, as I'm going to show you. Xisuthros, the flood hero, survivor of the flood, ruled 180 years. The versions of the 10 kings have them ruling 432,000 shars, which I've showed you guys many times, was already known in the ancient world as a 1,200-year period called Tu Nur. A Nur is 600 years. So, sharing my screen, I got to show you that chart. For those who haven't seen it, this chart's amazing. Those who haven't seen it, first of all, you just can't make this stuff up. Proof ancient Jews in Babylon understood SHAR reckoning and hid it in the book of Genesis. On the left are the 10 kings of Berossus. Here they are. Aloris is the first. Look at Ubar-Tutu. The ninth king ruled 77.7 years. You can only get that by dividing Berossus's king list by SHARs, by days. It's the only way to get this right here. But across on the 10 patriarchs of Genesis, here's from Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, and then Lamech, the father of Noah, survivor of the flood. Lamech lived according to Genesis for 777 years. The Jews in Babylon, when they were going through all this material, they already knew a bunch of the Egyptian histories, the Indo-Iranian histories. They understood the Vedic histories. They were just like us today. They were researching all the histories of other people. But the Jews themselves were such a new nation, they had not yet developed their own cosmology. All they were in possession of were hundreds of scrolls that were taken from the Israelite libraries after the Assyrians deported the Israelites in 721 BC, a phoenix year. Here we have the 10 patriarchs. Adam comes from the Near Eastern Semitic Babylonian Adamu, which simply means mankind. Seth was invented by the Jews to cover the Egyptians, the children of Set, Typhon. Enos preserves the Sumerian An or In, as an In key. Canaan comes from the cuneiform Kainu, which is a reference to an ancient priesthood, a cult called the Serpent Race. Mahalalel is the Semiticized version of the Vedic Maharishas. This right here is how they covered the Vedic, the Sanskrit histories. Jared was never a person. It is an actual description, arid, which means to descend. And it's in reference to the Anuna who descended from a mountain. They were called the Watchers. And they descended from Mount Ardon in the days of Jared. These are the ones that Enoch, his son, testified against. Enoch is merely a Semitic preservation of the older Sumerian Enki. Methuselah, I should have put it here, Methuselah comes from the old root words for prophesy and reader of omens. Then we have the ninth, Ubar-Tutu, the ninth in the series at 77.7 years by dividing the SHAR, what was translated by the Jews as 777 years for Lamech. Xisithros, the flood hero, is no other than Noah at the flood. The 10 kings of Berossus do not cover all pre-flood history. The 10 kings start 432,000 turnings of the stars before the flood, which is 12 centuries, which gives us 3439 BC, the first appearance of Enki. The Watchers descend the mountain. Nemesis X object destroys the world floods. All this is preserved in the names of the patriarchs. Remember, in the Jewish version, the 10 patriarchs cover a phoenix period, 1,656 years. This is the Genesis history. It starts with the Adam and Eve reset. It wasn't a creation. It was an absolute total devastation where the survivors were so shocked and naked, Adam and Eve, that they truly believed from this destruction that a new heavens and a new earth had been born. This is what the Adam represents. And Seth represents children of Set, Typhon. What caused the Adam and Eve reset? I've already showed it in my chronicon. It's on the 138-year calendar of the Phoenix. Typhon caused the Genesis reset. Typhon came back and caused the Great Flood, collapse of the vapor canopy 1656 years later. Jewish historian 1,000 years ago named Rashi put it in his commentaries that every 1,656 years our world is destroyed. Every bit of it fits right here. There is no way the Jews would have made Lamech live 777 years. They would have never put that in Genesis had not they already looked at Berossus' king list, which is far more ancient, and ascertained that the true way to understand Berossus mathematics was to divide everything by a day, the SHAR system. Here is absolute proof that a SHAR is a day, and that the ancient Jewish scribes who wrote the book of Genesis not only knew that, but concealed it. Here's a little deal. This is just off the internet. Lamech lived 777 years. Can't make this stuff up, guys. We don't have to make it up. The Jews did. Oh, we're not done. All right. Let's see. All right, we're moving on forward. Face diaper, don't be making memes with Benny Hill and me in them, man. Making fun of me being a hick. All right, let me get back to where I was. Yeah, the 28,000, such an unusual one. Urartutu's SHARs, it's not a gold. All the other ones are golden proportion numbers divisible by 144, 72, 108, all these magical numbers in physics, but not Urartutu. Urartutu was divisible by 2,800, which is divisible by 70 and 700. It's amazing. Totally different number. And it produces, when you divide it by days, it produces 77.7. And the Jews saw that, and they put 777 as the corresponding Lamech. It's amazing. So easy to put together once you see it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it anymore. You just can't unsee it. All right, let me find where I was at. Not sure where I was at in the narrative here. Sure, I'm close to being done. All right. Let's see. I will say that despite the 432,000 year periods and reigns of 64,800 SHARs, here's the beauty of this. Despite the fact that Berossus has these long numbers, despite the fact that the archaeologists have actually found and preserved in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, and there's like 9 different Sumerian prisms called king lists. They found a 10 king king list that corresponds vaguely with Berossus' account, which is amazing. But despite the fact that the Sumerian king list, like the one I've told you guys about, that's 241,200 SHARs for 7 kings, and then the flood swept over the earth, and then kingship was lowered at Kish 108 years later, which was like 34,000 SHARs, whatever. Despite all these great impossible numbers, the beauty of it is that archaeologists using only artifacts, using only the structures that are found, soil samples, using all their methods of analysis, archaeologists date all these kings to the 23rd, 22nd, 21st, and the 20th century BC. So even archaeology in the encyclopedias, the dates for these kings are still exactly where we put them in Chronicon, using chronology, a totally different system of analysis. The chronology matches what the historians and archaeologists are saying these kings lived at. Like in China, the Dragon Kings. It's the same period of time. So these impossible numbers used by Billy Carson and Zechariah Sitchin and so many others who hold to Anunnaki narrative of tens of thousands of years of reign, it's ignored even by establishment science. It's ignored using a totally different method of analysis. They're not chronologists. They're not even using chronology. Yeah, they're studying the cities. They're studying the anthropology and all the clues from botany and everything that's mentioned in the text. They're studying the ruins of Uruk and Ur and Larak and Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, and they're studying Nimrod and Ashurbanipal's palace, and they come to all these conclusions as to when these kings actually reigned. They're not going by this ridiculous arithmetic of Berossus. And yet they assign very, very close reigns as the Archaix chronology, using chronology. It's very, very, that's just something I needed to address because it's very interesting. So the 10 kings, let's see, before I go into this right here, let's see, what is that 2,400 year period? For those of you who don't know, the 10 kings of the pre-flood world is not just a Babylonian story. And it doesn't just match the 10 patriarchs of the Genesis for the pre-flood world. No. It goes, first of all, it's an SKL document. And what I mean is there is a Sumerian king list is SKL in the academic reports. It's an SKL document, meaning that they've already found a Sumerian king list prism that has 10 kings on it as well. And one of those kings is Ubar-Tutu. So it's amazing that Berossus got the 10 kings right and all that. He just botched some of the numbers. However, the Chinese begin their ancestral annals with the 10 emperors. Yeah, I'm not making that up. The Chinese tradition, the age of mythology, before the Chinese flood of Shu, began with 10 emperors. And the Chinese stories tell that just after the reign of the 10 emperors, after the creation, mankind struggled against fierce and gigantic monsters. Also, the Chinese say that after the 10 emperor period, not only were the animals huge, but people lived extraordinary long lives. Sounds like the Chinese had a vapor canopy tradition. In India, the 10 Petries or Petries, like Jupiter, the father Yu, the 10 Petries were called in ancient India the 10 fathers. Also, the old Germans and the Arabs had traditions of 10 patriarchs that began in some ancestral period before true history began. Iranian legends, probably Zoroastrian, Iranian legends recall a 10-king dynasty in antiquity that were specifically called the men of ancient law. Also, in Plato's narrative of Atlantis, we find that the capital city, Poseidonius or Poseidon or whatever, there were 10 statues of 10 ancient kings and 10 corresponding statues of their wives in ancient Atlantis. It's interesting. It's all very interesting. And the very fact that the Atlantis story also mentions the 10 kings only proves even further that Graham Hancock and Billy Carson are absolutely wrong about Atlantis being 11,600 BC. Jimmy Corsetti as well, and a bunch of others. It can't be 11,600 BC. The Atlantis narrative of the 10 kings, the 10 Petries, the men of the ancient law, the Genesis text of the 10 patriarchs, the 10 kings of Berossus, they all fit. They all fit in the mid-second millennium BC. There's no way it could have been in the 12th millennium BC. It wouldn't have happened. Wouldn't have happened. It's crazy. The 10 kings is such an important motif that even in the apocalyptic book of Revelation, we have the return of the 10 kings. And again, just like in the pre-flood world, they are subdued by the return of the 7 kings, a totally different dynasty that's antithetical to the 10 human kingdoms. The 7 kings are something else. So after the flood in the king list of Berossus, after the flood, we have Euseus reigned over the land of the Chaldeans for 2,400 years. He was followed by his son Comosbellus, who reigned 2,700 years. And after him came 84 kings, who, if we reckon it in the reigns of Euseus and Comosbellus, they ruled for 34,080 years. This is in the writings of Berossus. This is the dynasty that continued after the flood. It reigned for 34,080 years. Why is that important? Because when you reckon 34,080 years by the SHAR system, that a day equals that 34,800 is actually days, turnings of the stars, and not years, we get something totally different. Now, in the cuneiform, archaeologists have learned that the Kish dynasty began in 2131 BC. But now here in an old book is independent confirmation. Let me show you how this works. Archaeologists know that the Kish dynasty started in 2131 BC. But they know this by a totally different species of analysis. They're using archaeology and they're using all kinds of other things. They're not going by these impossible numbers of Billy Carson and everybody else. Zechariah Sitchin. They're not. Listen to this. 2,400 years plus 2,700 years plus 34,080 years of the 84 kings is exactly 39,180 SHARs. And when divided by 360, we arrive at 108.8 years. We know, and it's a matter that we are willing to debate anyone about. The data sets are irrefutable and overwhelming that the Great Flood was in 2239 BC. 108 years after 2239 BC, which that date cannot be changed and has never been changed in any of my published material since 2004. And there are hundreds of all kinds of events perfectly mathematically aligned, and the source materials are overwhelming for that date. 108 years after 2239 BC is 2131 BC, the first year of the Kish dynasty. You can't make this up. It's right here. Berossus says the same thing. Using the SHAR equals a day method, it perfectly lines up with establishment archaeology for the founding of the Kish dynasty after the flood. So all those people trying to say that the flood was 11,600 years BC, the flood was 25,000 year BC, all these people going by this weird 12,000 year cycle that so many people that are using nothing but scientific data are pushing, it's all completely theoretical and has no basis in the historical record. No chronological material from the ancient world comports with all this modern scientific crap that's being put out. But when you reduce all these impossible long numbers from these ancient texts by a factor that a SHAR equals a day and not a year, every bit of it lines up perfectly. So perfect that it's scary. How all this was put together by an ex-con in prison with an 8th grade education instead of somebody with a Princeton or Harvard or Yale degree is beyond my knowing. I don't know why all these people miss this unless it is specifically designed by the establishment for you not to know your true history. That's the only thing that's the only thing I can come up with, because it took no matter of genius to put this together. You just have to be willing to use a calculator when you're reading your books. That's it. That's all you got to do. So, we move on. After the Kish dynasty, he says, then the Medes gathered together an army against Babylon. These are the Elamites, Babylon, and took the land and set up tyrants from among their own people. These, 8 in number, reigned over Babylon 234 years. After that, 11 kings reigned 248 years. Then followed the Chaldeans with 49 kings who ruled over Babylon for 458 years. These were followed by 9 Arabian kings for 245 years. And then came 45 Assyrian kings for 526 years. Why all of a sudden, after the Kish dynasty, did all of a sudden a Babylonian historian, Berossus, is not talking long impossible numbers anymore? Now he's talking actual years. Why? I'm going to tell you why. Because the Kish dynasty collapsed in 1849 BC. 1849 BC was when Lagash, Uruk, Calneh, all these Sumerian cities were wiped out in fallout from the sky. At the same time that Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim were wiped out. At the same time that Mohenjo-Daro and Lamech and the Indus Valley Harappan civilization were all wiped out. This is the origin of the infamous lamentation texts of the Near East that talk about this vast destruction from the sky. Yeah, that's when that happened. When that happened, the SHAR was no longer used after the Sumerian civilization was wiped out. After the Sumerians were wiped out in 1849 BC, the Amuru moved in and took over. They filled the power vacuum. I have fully documented this migration of Western Caucasians into the Near East called the Amuru, called the Amorites. On my channel, I've got multiple presentations talking about them and how they were hated, but they were feared and respected. They came in, the origin of all these people like Israelites and Phoenicians, how they had come in and run, the origin of the Syrians and the Aramaeans, how they had come in and taken over everything. The reason Berossus went from talking to tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years to just centuries, the reason is because the SHAR was no longer used and Berossus had no more frames of reference. After 1849 BC, nobody was using SHARs anymore. It became extinct. So adding up all these years of Berossus is only 1,711 years of the history of Babylon until Babylon ceased to exist during the Greek times. That's it. So simple. Berossus has been absolutely correct everywhere in here. What's incorrect are the interpretations of Billy Carson, Jimmy Corsetti, Zechariah Sitchin, and everybody else who holds to this Anunnaki fantasy of god kings living for tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. Even the Sumerian king list of 7 kings is 241,200 SHARs, which divided by, a day being a year, it's really simple. It's just 670 years. So I thought that was really interesting as well. What we got here? The enormous number of 432,000 years, which the fragments allot to the 10 rulers of the first dynasty, and the 34,080 years of the second dynasty, which came immediately after the flood, show that the statements of Diodorus, Cicero, and Pliny are not mere imagination, because they use those long, huge numbers too. Though these totals are perhaps scarcely intended to give the period during which observations were made by the Chaldeans, but the antiquity ascribed by the Babylonian priests. This guy expresses doubt that those numbers are real. The author of this book did not understand the SHAR was a day. All he knew is that the Egyptians lied about long periods of time because things were divided by moons, not years. And he knew that 432,000 years and 34,080 years is not an accurate depiction of the time period. He just didn't know what the accurate calculation was. Chart, Lamech. So let's get here, stop sharing my screen. So, went on a little bit longer than I wanted to, but you guys have seen absolute proof right here. There was 4 more SHAR drops in here that I did not have before, but here's 4 more I'm adding to my data set on the SHARs. The big one is about Lamech. The big one is the 77.7 of Ubar-Tutu, which matches the 777 years of Lamech, showing that the Jews not only knew how to calculate SHARs accurately, but they also chose to cover it up in their Phoenix document. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, the book of Genesis, the first 5 chapters, are literally a Phoenix document. Phoenix information is preserved in the translations of many words that are in the document, but also the number of years being 1,656 exactly. I've shown you guys in multiple presentations that the Jewish people, the ancestors of the Jewish people, have always known about the Phoenix. Remember, Thales of Miletus was a Phoenician by remote descent. That's what Herodotus called him. And he accurately predicted the darkening of the sun in 583 BC, 2 years before it even happened. It actually stopped a war between the Medes and the Lydians. The Tuatha Danann were also of Semitic parentage. When they invaded Ireland, they used the Phoenix knowledge against the Furbolgs to defeat them, because the Furbolgs thought that the Danann sorcerers were the ones that darkened the sun and created the earthquakes. Now, it's amazing. It's amazing histories, guys. But this Nostradamus knew all about the Phoenix. I've showed that in multiple presentations. Nostradamus knew about the Phoenix, the 138-year Phoenix number, the Phoenix cycle. He mentions Phoenix numbers. He even accurately predicts May, the month of May in the year 2040 as being returned to the Phoenix. He knew about 1902. He knew all these things. Nostradamus was amazing. Nostradamus was a Jew. Michael Nostradamus was Jewish. There's a long, lengthy history of this. Remember, Rashi, Jewish commentator on the Talmud, of course, he's Jewish. And he said every 1,656 years, the world is destroyed. These are just some of the examples. I've preserved even more than this in my research. But these people have long known about the Phoenix, and they've used it to their advantage against the rest of the world. Like when Jacob did. When Jacob assembled his sons, and the Canaanites were enraged, and they came up against Jacob and his sons, and Jacob prayed to God, and suddenly the sun darkened and rocks fell from the sky, and the minority of Israelites were then able to defeat the majority of the 7 armies of Canaan. So these are just some examples, guys. This is the reason why this type of knowledge has been kept secret. Remember, all the alchemical text I've showed you. I got a presentation that's 4 hours long that shows you hundreds of pictures from alchemy in medieval times. And in those pictures, you see little Jewish symbols and Jewish words and Jewish effigies, and all hidden in there with a phoenix hidden in there. References to 138, references to people surviving in the underworld while people on the surface are returned to the status of Adam and Eve. That's why all this information is important. Zechariah Sitchin lied to us about the SHAR, and it did research Look what it did. It gave birth to a bunch of Billy Carsons who are out there putting out a plethora of terrible data, fooling a lot of people. The accurate information makes everything in the ancient world all the mysteries make sense. Once you understand that a SHAR is a day, everything starts making sense. It's amazing. This information has been covered up. But Zecharia Sitchin was also on an agenda. Zecharia Sitchin is Jewish. These people have kept this information from the whole world. 1902 was the last Phoenix year. And the events of that year are amazing. But there's so much that has been censored and covered up about that year as well, because the centers of information are tightly controlled. Most people don't know who really rules them. You just don't know because you haven't looked. Now, I told you guys in the beginning of this video, the resistance is real. And these people are very, very active networking against me over and over and over. They've done a pretty good job of just drawing attention. They're not going to stop me. But still, this is what's been going on behind the scenes, guys. Some of you know what I'm talking about. But this presentation's over. I'm just rambling from this point on. I'm just rambling. But the SHAR is a day, and this data is inescapable. It is inescapable. Now we need to start understanding why this information has been deliberately kept from the majority of the human family. Why has a small minority been allowed to keep this fantastic data, to rewrite all these books, to perpetuate these frauds upon us, and be so well funded like Zecharia Sitchin with his Earth Chronicles? It doesn't matter that academia said that Zecharia Sitchin was a fraud. It doesn't matter. He was still allowed to put all the information out. Immanuel Velikovsky is Jewish. It doesn't matter that the academic world rose up and said, "Man, you're wrong about all this," because he confused Venus with Phoenix. His information was put out there and it was funded anyway. Yeah. So what's the deal? Why is the Archaix data being so suppressed? What's really going on? And with that, I'm going to hit my outro, guys. I got some chicken on my mind. Let's see here. I need to go to my desktop. I need to go find something on my desktop. Oh, there it is. Peace out, guys.